The broadcast came in at 0247 on a Tuesday in October on a frequency that hasn't been active since 1987. I know that because I maintain the infrastructure. Every repeater, every antenna, every licensed channel in this district runs through my shop. Frequency 166.300 megahertz was decommissioned before I was born, and there's no hardware assigned to it, no repeater programmed to carry it, no agency, no operator, no station anywhere in the Pacific Northwest legally transmitting on that channel. It's dead spectrum. It has been for 37 years. But at OH2 47, my monitoring receiver left. Scanning as part of a routine propagation check I'd started at midnight locked onto 166.300 and held. I was at my bench, resoldering a connector for a backcountry repeater scheduled for installation Thursday. The scan lock alert is a single beep. Quiet. I almost missed it under the solder fan. I didn't almost miss what came next. A voice. Female, flat, professional cadence. Standard emergency structure. This is an emergency broadcast for all available units. We have one party, adult male, injured and disoriented, requesting immediate extraction. Location 44.7138 north, 121.8462 west. Saddle Creek drainage, approximately 2.3 miles northeast of the confluence. Party is experiencing moderate hypothermia and possible lower leg fracture. Condition deteriorating. Requesting air or ground extraction. Time of report 0247. I put the soldering iron down, set it in the cradle without looking at it, which I never do because it's a fire risk. My hand went to the receiver's display. Signal strength, strong, clean. The kind of signal you get from a well-maintained repeater 3 miles away, not from atmospheric skip or thermal ducting pulling some ghost transmission across state lines. This was local. This was in my district. I pulled the logbook across the bench, wrote down the time, the frequency, the signal characteristics, then I wrote the time down again because the first entry looked rushed and I needed this to be legible if anyone asked. I put the pencil down and listened. The broadcast repeated. Identical content, identical cadence, identical timestamp embedded in the message. Then silence. Then it repeated again. 3 cycles in 4 minutes. Then the carrier dropped, and 166.300 went dead. I sat in the shop for maybe 90 seconds. The fan was still running on the soldering station. My coffee was on the shelf, above the receiver where I'd left it 2 hours ago. I hadn't touched it since midnight. The building was quiet the way buildings are at 3 in the morning when you're the only person for a quarter mile. Here's what I knew. The signal was real. It wasn't intermod, it wasn't harmonic bleed, it wasn't a scanner artifact. I've been doing signals work for 11 years, 4 in the Army, 3 contract, 4 with the Forest Service. I know what a clean transmission sounds like. I know what atmospheric noise sounds like. This was a structured, repeated, intentional broadcast on a frequency no one in the region is licensed to use, describing a specific emergency at specific coordinates in my district. I followed procedure. I keyed up my supervisor on the district admin channel, 164.475, the one we use for non-operational communication. Time of my transmission, 0256. I gave him the facts. Frequency, content, signal quality, my assessment that it warranted investigation and possible dispatch coordination with the ranger station. He responded at 0300, 4 minutes. Paul Hediger has been district communications supervisor for 9 years. In 14 months of working under him, he has never responded to a non-operational contact in less than 20 minutes between the hours of 2200 and 0600. I know this because I've logged every exchange 4 minutes, and what he said wasn't stand by or I'll contact dispatch or can you confirm. What he said was this, and I wrote it down verbatim. Ellison, log it under incident code 7-X. Do not respond on any frequency. Do not retransmit. Do not contact field operations or dispatch. Confirm compliance. His voice was flat, Not tired, not confused, not alarmed. Flat in the way that rehearsal makes things flat. I confirmed. I said, "Copy, 7-X, no response, no retransmit, no field contact." And then I sat in the quiet of my shop and felt the specific weight of being told to do nothing about a distress call. Incident code 7-X. In 18 months of Forest Service communications work, I have never seen that code. It's not in the NPS communications manual. It's not in our district SOP. It's not in the interagency coordination guide. I checked all three before the sun came up. It exists nowhere in any document I have access to. But Paul said it like it was routine, like a thing he'd said before. I spent the next hour doing what I do. I ran the coordinates from the broadcast against our district topo maps. 44.7138 north, 121.8462 west. Real location, Saddle Creek drainage, upper reach, about a mile and a half above where it meets the main moderately difficult terrain. Accessible by a maintained trail from the Cascade Lakes Highway. Not remote, not technical, just backcountry. I checked the permit database, not because anyone told me to, because I needed to know if that location was empty or occupied. It wasn't empty. There's a group permit on file, a guided day hike, 8 participants plus 2 leaders, scheduled to pass through the upper Saddle Creek drainage in 3 days. This Thursday, the broadcast described a man, hypothermic, with a leg injury at those exact coordinates. And in 72 hours, 10 people are supposed to be walking right through them. I sat with that until 0600. Then I checked the permit database again because I'd learned in the Army that when something matters, you verify it twice and screenshot it once. The permit was gone, not canceled, rerouted. New path filed, avoiding Saddle Creek entirely. Alternate drainage 2 miles south. Reason listed, trail maintenance seasonal closure. Authorization timestamp 0458. 2 hours after my report, 11 minutes after I logged the broadcast under a code that doesn't exist in any manual I can find. Signed by someone in the Resource Protection Division, a name I've never seen on a single piece of district correspondence in 14 months. I didn't tell Paul I'd checked the permits. I didn't tell anyone. I just wrote down the timestamp of the reroute, the name on the authorization, and the fact that nobody had asked me whether Saddle Creek Trail had any maintenance issues, because it doesn't. I inspected the repeater at that junction 6 days ago. The trail was clear. The drainage was open. There is no seasonal closure. Someone moved 10 people away from the coordinates in that broadcast, and they did it before sunrise without telling me, in direct response to a signal I was ordered to ignore. I made myself drink the coffee. It had been cold for 5 hours. The name on the reroute authorization was D. Voss, Resource Protection Division. I searched that name in every directory I had access to: district staff list, regional personnel database, the interagency coordination roster, even the volunteer registry. Nothing. No Voss in any division, at any level, in any forest in the region. I checked the organizational chart pinned above my bench, the one updated quarterly by the district ranger's office. Resource Protection Division isn't on it. Not as a subdivision, not as a program area, not as a liaison office. It doesn't exist. But the reroute order was formatted correctly. Right form number, right signature block placement, right routing codes. Whoever filed it knew exactly how Forest Service administrative paperwork functions. They either work here or they used to. I printed the reroute document at 0614 and put it in my personal file, the one I keep in my truck, not in the shop. Then I went back to the permit database and looked at the original group hike permit for Saddle Creek. Still visible in the system, but marked with a status I'd never seen before. Superseded RPD. Not canceled. Not modified by the permit issuing office. Superseded by a division that doesn't appear on any chart I can find. My partner, Gabe Orozco, arrived at 0730. Normal morning. He came in with his thermos, checked the day's maintenance schedule on the whiteboard, and asked if the propagation check had turned up any issues overnight. I told him no. Band conditions were normal. Nothing to report. I don't know why I said that. I'm not someone who lies easily at work, and I'm not someone who follows instructions without understanding them. But Paul's directive had been specific. Do not discuss with field operations. Gabe is field operations. And something about the speed of Paul's response. The 4 minutes, the rehearsed flatness made me feel like discussing this would change something I couldn't undo. So I said nothing. Gabe went out to check the solar array on the Ridge 6 repeater, and I sat at my bench with the logbook open and the morning quiet around me. I went back to the beginning. Code 7-X. If Paul used that code like it was standard, then it had to appear somewhere in district records, even if it wasn't in any official manual. I pulled the maintenance logs from the filing cabinet, 3 binders. My 14 months, my predecessor's 9 months before that, and a partial binder covering approximately 2 years before him. I went through every entry. My predecessor, listed in the records as Tenorio, had 3 entries tagged with 7-X. Each one was brief. A date, a time, a frequency notation, 166.300 in all 3 cases, and the phrase, logged per protocol, no action. No description of the broadcast content, no signal analysis, no follow-up, just the timestamp and the code. The binder before Tenorio's had 1 entry. Different handwriting, smaller, more angular, same format, date, time, frequency, logged per protocol. But this one had something extra. A single additional line written below the standard notation in slightly harder pencil pressure, like it was added later. C. Hediger, Paul, my current supervisor, named in a log entry from at least 3 years before I started. I closed the binder carefully, set it back in the filing cabinet. My hands were steady. I'm noting that because it seems relevant, I was not frightened at this point. I was confused in a professional capacity. There is a difference between fear and the recognition that you are operating inside a system that has rules you haven't been given. At 0840, I called Paul on the admin line, not the radio, the desk phone. He picked up on the second ring. Ellison, Paul, I need clarification on the 7-X protocol. Specifically, I need to know whether there's a written SOP I haven't been issued, or if this is verbal only. Silence for about 4 seconds. Not long by normal standards. Long for Paul. It's a legacy designation, he said. Atmospheric ducting phenomenon, analog signals from decommissioned infrastructure getting carried by thermal inversion layers. It's been documented at the regional level. The protocol is simple: log it, don't act on it. Because acting on phantom signals wastes resources and creates false incident reports. This is what I want to be clear about. That explanation is technically plausible. Thermal ducting is real. It does carry signals over anomalous distances. Old analog transmissions can be captured and re-radiated under specific atmospheric conditions. If I were a different person, someone without 11 years in signals work, someone who hadn't spent 4 years in Army SIGINT learning to characterize transmission sources, I might have accepted it. But the signal I received was not analog. The modulation characteristics were digital clean symbol transitions, consistent baud rate, no analog noise floor, and the signal strength was local. Ducting produces attenuated fading signals with multipath distortion. This was line of sight clean, 3-mile radius clean. Whatever transmitted that broadcast was in my district, running modern equipment on a frequency nobody is licensed to use. I didn't say this to Paul. I said understood. And the reroute on the Saddle Creek group permit, was that related? 4 seconds of silence again. Then what reroute? The group hike through Upper Saddle Creek, 8+2. It was rerouted this morning at 0458, signed by someone named Voss in Resource Protection Division. I'm not familiar with that action, Paul said. Permit modifications go through the Ranger District Office. That's not our lane. He was right that it's not our lane. He was wrong that he wasn't familiar with it. because the reroute happened 11 minutes after I reported the broadcast to him at 04:58, while he was still, presumably, the only person who knew what the broadcast contained, unless he told someone else immediately after our exchange, unless he didn't need to tell anyone, because they were already listening. Okay, I said. Just wanted to confirm the 7-X procedure. I'll keep logging per protocol. Good, Paul said. And Ellison, you don't need to monitor that frequency actively. The scan lock will catch it if it recurs. Don't dedicate a receiver to it. I hadn't told him I was considering dedicating a receiver to it. I hadn't told anyone. Copy, I said. I hung up. I sat at my bench for a while. The shop was warm from the morning sun coming through the east-facing window. Gabe's truck was gone. The whiteboard had the day's tasks listed in his handwriting. Ridge 6 solar check. Antenna swap at Lookout Flat. Mileage log due Friday. Normal work. Normal district. Normal Tuesday. I opened my personal notebook, not the official logbook, a pocket-sized Write in the Rain I carry in my vest, and wrote down 2 things. First, Paul knew what frequency I was going to monitor before I said it. Second, the reroute was filed during the only window when Paul was the sole person with the broadcast coordinates. Then I wrote a third thing, which wasn't evidence, but felt important. Paul did not ask me what the broadcast said. Not at 0300 when I first reported it. Not at 0840 when I called for clarification. At no point in either conversation did my supervisor ask me to describe the content of an emergency transmission received on a dead frequency in the middle of the night. He already knew what it said, or he already knew it didn't matter what it said, only that I not respond to it. I put the notebook in my vest pocket. I went through the rest of my morning. I filed a routine maintenance report. I calibrated a replacement receiver for the Lookout Flat swap. I ate lunch at my bench. I did not monitor 166.300 actively, but I left the scan running. And at 13:40 that afternoon, while I was labeling cable, the receiver locked again. Same frequency, same signal strength, different coordinates. The second broadcast described a different emergency. Solo hiker, female, dehydration and disorientation, requesting ground extraction. Coordinates placed her at a drainage I recognized, Miller Creek East Fork, about 4 miles from the nearest trailhead. Signal characteristics identical to the first. Digital modulation, local strength, clean carrier on 166.300. Duration, 3 cycles of the same message over 4 minutes. Then silence. I logged it in the official book under 7-X. Then I opened my Write in the Rain notebook and wrote everything the official log didn't require. Signal strength reading, modulation assessment, exact wording of the broadcast, and the coordinates to 6 decimal places. I did not contact Paul. He told me not to dedicate a receiver to the frequency. He hadn't told me not to listen when the scan caught it on its own. That evening, after Gabe had gone home for the day, I pulled the permit database for Miller Creek drainage. There was a solo backcountry permit issued for that area. Female hiker, 3-night trip. Entry date, Friday 3 days out, 71 hours from the timestamp on the broadcast. I checked the permit again the next morning. Status superseded RPD. New route assigned, bypassing Miller Creek entirely. Authorization timestamp, 0512, filed overnight. Signed D. Voss. I printed it, put it in the truck file. The third broadcast arrived Wednesday at 0118. I was home district housing a 1-bedroom unit about 400 yards from the shop. I wasn't monitoring, but I'd left a recording device patched into the scan receiver before locking up. A small digital unit on a voice-activated trigger. When I came in Thursday morning, the recorder had captured 7 minutes of audio, 2 complete broadcast cycles on 166.300, then silence, then a third cycle 18 minutes later. This one described a 2-person survey team. GPS coordinates, placed them on a ridgeline above the South Fork, about 9 miles into the backcountry. Emergency described. Equipment failure, leading to an unplanned overnight exposure. Requesting vehicle extraction at a lower trailhead. I checked the district activity calendar. There was a Forest Service timber survey scheduled for that ridgeline, 2-person crew, planned for Saturday, 3 days from the broadcast timestamp, 72 hours. By Thursday afternoon, the survey had been reassigned to a different drainage, no reason listed in the system. Just a schedule modification backdated to look like it had been the plan all along. But I'd screenshotted the original calendar entry Tuesday evening. I had the before and after. 4 broadcasts in 6 days. 4 locations. 4 scheduled human presences within a 68 to 74 hour window after each transmission. 4 quiet administrative adjustments, moving people away from those coordinates. I started a spreadsheet. Nothing fancy, just a table in my notebook, because I didn't want this on a government computer. Columns, broadcast date/time, coordinates, described emergency type, scheduled activity at those coordinates, scheduled activity date time gap between broadcast and scheduled presence, date reroute appeared in system, reroute authorization. Every row told the same story. Broadcast arrives, describes an emergency. Emergency matches a real scheduled activity at those exact coordinates, roughly 72 hours out. Activity gets moved within hours of my logging the broadcast. The move is always signed by boss, always attributed to Resource Protection Division, always formatted correctly, but originating from nowhere I can trace. The pattern was clean, too clean for coincidence, and it meant one of 2 things. Either someone was manufacturing fake broadcasts to match the schedule and then rerouting activities as a precaution against a signal they'd created themselves, which made no sense, or the broadcasts were arriving first, describing something that hadn't happened yet, and someone was using them as a warning system to prevent the described emergencies from occurring. The second option made less sense, but it matched the evidence better. On Friday, I did something I probably shouldn't have. Nothing dramatic, just drove to one of the broadcast source locations during my normal maintenance rounds. I had legitimate reason to be at the Miller Creek repeater site. It was on my quarterly inspection schedule. I moved the inspection up by 2 weeks. Nobody would notice or care. The drive took 40 minutes on gravel forest road. Locked gate, standard access. The repeater site is a small clearing at 4,200 feet, 1 equipment cabinet, 1 antenna tower, solar panel array, all fenced. I unlocked the cabinet and ran my standard diagnostic sequence. Everything nominal. Battery voltage, solar charge controller, repeater function, programmed frequencies, all within spec. But I brought my spectrum analyzer, handheld unit, nothing fancy, but adequate for field characterization. I powered it up and swept the band around 166.300. There it was, faint well below the noise floor for casual monitoring, invisible to the repeater's own diagnostics, but present. A residual carrier on 166.300, barely registering, like the ghost of a signal that had been there recently and hadn't fully decayed. The kind of trace you'd find if a transmitter had been active at that location within the last few hours. Except there was no transmitter. I checked every component in the cabinet. I checked the antenna feed. I checked the connections. There is no hardware at this site capable of generating a signal on 166.300. The repeater operates on entirely different frequency pairs. The antenna isn't even cut to resonate at 166 megahertz. It's a commercial VHF unit optimized for the 170 band. And yet the residual was there, coming from somewhere inside the infrastructure, present in the feed line between the antenna and the cabinet, as if the signal had been propagating through the equipment rather than being generated by it. I noted the reading, photographed the spectrum analyzer display, put the unit away, closed the cabinet, stood in the clearing for a moment, listening to absolutely nothing unusual, just wind in the trees and the faint hum of the solar charge controller. Then I checked the site logbook. Every repeater site has a weatherproof notebook in a pouch, mounted inside the cabinet door. Technicians sign in when they visit, note any work performed, date and time. Standard practice. I'd signed this book twice before during my 14 months. The last entry before mine was Tenorio's, my predecessor. Dated 11 months ago, routine inspection, nothing noted. Normal. But below his entry, in handwriting I didn't recognize not Tenorio's small angular print, not Gabe's slanted cursive, not Paul's blocky capitals. There was another line, clean blue ink, precise lettering. The notation read, antenna feed impedance check, no issues found, firmware verified, routine language, standard maintenance shorthand. Nothing unusual about the content. The date on the entry was next Tuesday, 6 days from now, written in ink, in a physical logbook, inside a locked cabinet, at a gated site that only 4 people in the district have keys to access. I read it 3 times. I touched the page to make sure it wasn't a transfer or a bleed through from a previous page. It wasn't. The ink was on the surface, dry, undisturbed, real handwriting, real entry, real date, a date that hadn't happened yet. I photographed it, closed the book, closed the cabinet, drove back to the shop in silence, my hands steady on the wheel, my chest tight in a way that had nothing to do with the elevation. Someone is visiting my sites. Someone with a key, with knowledge of our maintenance procedures, writing future dates in logbooks like they've already been there. And the broadcasts are coming through the equipment, not to it, but through it on a frequency the hardware shouldn't be able to carry. I sat in the shop parking lot for 5 minutes before going inside. When I did, I checked my schedule. I had a maintenance visit to that same Miller Creek repeater site on the calendar. Next Tuesday, the same date in the logbook. The date someone had already signed in for a visit that hadn't occurred on the same day I was scheduled to be there. I didn't change the schedule, not yet. I wanted to see if someone would change it for me. I checked the gate log first. Every access point to a repeater site in this district uses a combination padlock with a recorded code rotation. When you visit, you sign the gate log, a separate sheet in a weatherproof box mounted on the gate post. I'd signed it on my way in. Before my entry, the most recent signature was mine from 3 months ago, and before that, Tenorio, 11 months back. No one had signed the gate log between Tenorio's last visit and my arrival Friday, but someone had been inside the cabinet and written in the site logbook, which meant either they climbed the fence possible but unlikely given the razor wire, or they had the gate code and didn't sign in, or they were never physically at the gate at all. I spent Saturday morning going through key and code access records. Our district maintains a simple spreadsheet listing who holds codes for which sites. 4 people have Miller Creek access, me, Gabe, Paul, and one name I'd never followed up on, listed simply as RPD liaison. No first name, no employee number, no contact information, just the designation and a date of access authorization. March 2003, 23 years ago. The same access entry, never updated, never reviewed, carrying the same division abbreviation that appeared on every reroute order. RPD, Resource Protection Division, the division that doesn't exist on any org chart. I photographed the spreadsheet. Then I pulled access records for our other repeater sites, all 14 of them. 11 had the standard 4-person access list. Me, Gabe, Paul, and the district ranger. 3 did not. 3 had the 5th entry, RPD liaison, same date, March 2003. All authorized simultaneously, all without an employee number. The 3 sites with RPD access were Miller Creek, Saddle Creek, and South Fork Ridge. I didn't need to check my notes to recognize those names. They were 3 of the 4 broadcast coordinates from the past week. I drove to Saddle Creek that afternoon. Legitimate reason again. The quarterly inspection schedule gave me enough flexibility to justify the visit without raising questions. Gate log, only my entries, and Tenorio. No unauthorized signatures. But when I opened the equipment cabinet and pulled the site logbook, I found it. Same handwriting, same blue ink, same precise lettering. This entry read, RF interference survey cleared, no action required. Dated 9 days from now, a Thursday. I stood in the cabinet doorway with the book open, reading the entry twice more. The handwriting was identical to the Miller Creek entry, same letter spacing, same slightly European style on the numeral 7, same pressure on downstrokes. One person writing future dates in locked logbooks at sites they have no recorded access to, describing maintenance actions that haven't been performed. And 9 days from now was the Thursday after next. I checked my calendar on my phone. I had nothing scheduled at Saddle Creek for that date, but I pulled up the district maintenance system on my laptop when I got back to the truck. The shared calendar Paul and I both use for scheduling. There it was, a maintenance visit to the Saddle Creek repeater, scheduled for that Thursday, assigned to me. I had not created that entry. It wasn't there Friday morning when I'd checked my upcoming week. Somebody had added it to my schedule while I was driving forest roads, and the system showed no edit history, no creator name, just the task, the date, and my name. I sat in the truck with the engine off for a while. Checked the time, 14:20. A Stellar's Jay was making noise in the Doug fir above the access road. Normal afternoon, normal forest. I started looking into Tenorio. Not a deep investigation. I didn't have the access or the authority for personnel files, but I had the maintenance logs and I had the district's informal institutional memory. Monday morning I asked Gabe about him, casual, while we were prepping equipment for a routine antenna swap. Tenorio? Yeah, he was here about 9 months before you started. Quiet guy, did good work. Why'd he leave? Gabe paused with a wrench in his hand. Not a long pause, maybe 2 seconds. But Gabe doesn't pause. He talks like he works steady, uninterrupted, efficient. Got another posting, I think? Or went private sector? I don't remember exactly. He went back to the wrench. Paul would know. I wasn't going to ask Paul. Not about this. I tried the admin assistant at the district office, Janet, who processes all the paperwork for arrivals and departures. She's been there 14 years. Knows everyone. Tenorio, she said. Sure, nice kid, young for the posting. Do you remember why he transferred out? She was quiet for a moment. Then, I don't think he transferred. I think his detail ended. Seasonal thing, maybe. She sounded uncertain for the first time in any conversation I'd had with her. It was pretty quick. Paul handled the paperwork himself, which was unusual. Normally I process separations. Paul handled it personally? Said it was a special circumstance. Administrative. I didn't push. She paused again. Why do you ask? Just found some of his notes in a maintenance log. Wanted to make sure I'm not duplicating work he already completed. Oh, sure, that makes sense. She sounded relieved to have a normal reason, which told me she'd been prepared for an abnormal one. I went back to Tenorio's logbook entries, read through all 9 months of them. His handwriting was consistent, small, angular, neat. His entries were thorough, frequencies checked, readings noted, parts replaced. Professional. Then I compared it to the future dated entries I'd photographed. Not even close. Different hand entirely. Tenorio didn't write those entries. Neither did Gabe or Paul. The handwriting belonged to someone else. Someone with site access, cabinet keys, and knowledge of our documentation format, who visits locked infrastructure sites without signing gate logs and writes in maintenance books using dates that haven't arrived yet. Wednesday morning, I drove to the 3rd RPD access site, South Fork Ridge. Steeper road, longer drive, 45 minutes on switchbacks above the river valley. Gate log. Clean. Only authorized personnel. Last visit mine. 6 weeks prior. I opened the cabinet, pulled the logbook. The entry was there. Same hand. Same ink. Antenna alignment check. 0.3 degree correction applied. Verified. Dated 12 days from now. But this time there was something else. Below the entry, in the same handwriting, a second line I hadn't seen at the other sites. Confirmed visit, Ellison C., scheduled. My name, my initial, in a logbook entry dated 12 days in the future, at a site I had no current plans to visit. I checked the district maintenance system from my truck. Took a few minutes for the satellite connection to load the calendar. When it did, I scrolled forward 12 days. South Fork Ridge repeater, scheduled maintenance. Assigned technician Ellison. I had not requested this visit. I had not been informed of it. It did not exist in the system 3 days ago, I'm certain. because I review my upcoming schedule every Monday morning 2 weeks out. Someone was creating maintenance visits in my name at sites where future dated logbook entries already anticipated my arrival. The entries were being written first. Then the official schedule was updated to match. My movements were being documented before they were assigned, and assigned without my knowledge or consent. I closed the laptop. I sat in the truck at 4,600 feet, with the window cracked and the smell of pine pitch and cold air coming in, and I thought about what I was actually looking at. One person, based on the handwriting, was visiting district infrastructure sites ahead of me. They were writing in our logbooks as though they'd already performed work on dates that hadn't occurred. Then those dates were appearing in the official scheduling system with my name attached. And separately, the broadcasts were arriving on 166.300, describing emergencies at these same locations. Emergencies involving the scheduled human presence that was being manufactured without that person's knowledge. The entries came first, then the schedule changes, then the broadcasts, which meant the broadcasts weren't predicting what would happen at those coordinates. They were predicting what was being arranged to happen, and the arrangements were already in progress around me, my name, my schedule, my routes, being written into the system by someone who'd been doing this for at least 23 years. I drove back to the shop, parked, went inside, sat at my bench, opened the maintenance system one more time and searched not my schedule, everyone's. Every technician assignment in the district for the next 30 days, 3 entries I hadn't seen before, 3 site visits, all assigned to me, all at RPD-access sites, all on dates that matched within 1 day the future dated logbook entries I'd found. And one more, a 4th entry, 14 days out, at a site I hadn't checked yet, a backcountry repeater at a location called Burnt Ridge, assigned technician Tenorio M. Tenorio, who left this district 9 months before I arrived, who doesn't work here anymore, whose separation Paul handled personally without standard paperwork, still in the system, still being scheduled, still expected somewhere on a date 2 weeks from now, at a site deep enough in the backcountry that nobody goes there without a reason. I tried to delete Tenorio's entry from the scheduling system, not because I expected it to work, but because I needed to see what happened when I tried. The system accepted my edit. The entry disappeared. I refreshed the page. It was back. Same date, same site, same name. I deleted it again, refreshed, back. 3 times I did this. 3 times the entry restored itself within seconds, as if my edit had never registered at the database level. I checked my own permissions. Full right access to the maintenance calendar. I've modified schedules dozens of times without issue. This wasn't a permissions problem. The system simply wouldn't let the entry stay deleted. Something was writing it back faster than I could remove. I left it alone after the 3rd attempt. Thursday morning I focused on something concrete. Tenorio's employment status. I couldn't access personnel files directly, but the maintenance scheduling system has its own user direct, a list of active technicians who can be assigned tasks. I opened it. My name was there. Gabe's. 2 seasonal techs from the neighboring district who occasionally cross-assign for large projects. And Tenorio, M. Active. No end date. No separation flag. Still a valid assignee in the system. 9 months after he supposedly left. I checked his last logged activity in the system, not the maintenance calendar, but the work completion records, where technicians close out assignments after performing them. His most recent completed task was dated 11 months ago. The Miller Creek inspection I'd seen in his logbook, normal. But his most recent assigned task, open, not completed, was the Burnt Ridge visit, 14 days from now. Created in the system 4 days ago, which meant it appeared while I was discovering the logbook entries at the other sites. Whoever was building these assignments was doing it in real time, contemporaneous with my investigation. Not archived, not legacy, active and ongoing. I spent the rest of Thursday trying to work normally. Gabe and I swapped an antenna at the Lookout Flat site. 3 hours of physical work, ladder climbing, connector termination, alignment verification. I welcomed it. My hands needed something to do that made sense. But even on the tower 80 feet up with a wrench in my hand and the wind pulling at my jacket, I kept thinking about the sequencing. The logbook entries were written first. Then the scheduling system was updated to match. Then the broadcasts arrived describing emergencies at those locations. Then the reroutes appeared, moving people away from the coordinates. 4 steps, always in that order, which meant the broadcasts weren't the beginning of anything. They were step 3. Something was already in motion before the signal ever hit 166.300. That night, home in my district housing unit, I pulled out my notebook and reorganized everything chronologically. Not by when I discovered it, by when each piece of evidence was created. The Miller Creek logbook entry was dated next Tuesday, but based on the ink condition and my first observation of it on Friday, it had been physically written sometime before my visit, meaning sometime in the preceding days. The scheduling system entry assigning me to Miller Creek appeared Saturday or Sunday. The broadcast describing an emergency at Miller Creek arrived Tuesday afternoon. The reroute for the civilian hiker near Miller Creek was filed hours after I logged the broadcast. Logbook entry schedule assignment broadcast reroute. That was the actual sequence. And the logbook entry was the earliest piece I could find. But was it really the first step? Or was there something before that? Something I couldn't see because it didn't leave physical evidence I had access to. Friday morning, I went back to the scheduling system and pulled a full history export. Every assigned maintenance visit for the past 18 months. I filtered by site, just the 3 RPD access locations, plus Burnt Ridge. The export came back with 47 entries. Most were minor tenorios. Normal visits completed, documented, but scattered among them were 11 entries that stood out. They had no completion record, no closeout, no technician notes. They were assigned, dated, and then simply left open permanently pending. I checked the assigned names. 7 were tenorios, all dated after his supposed departure, all at RPD access sites. All open. 4 were mine. 2 I recognized the upcoming visits I'd already discovered. 2 I hadn't seen before, both at sites I hadn't checked yet. Both dated within the next 3 weeks. Tenorio had 7 uncompleted visits stacking up in the system like appointments for someone who would never arrive. And now I had 4. The system was building a schedule for both of us, assigning us to specific places on specific dates, regardless of whether we were available, willing, or in Tenorio's case, employed. I started cross-referencing the 11 anomalous entries against my broadcast log. For the 4 I'd recorded in my notebook, the match was perfect. Each broadcast location corresponded exactly to one of these assignments, and each broadcast arrived approximately 48 hours after the assignment appeared in the system. For Tenorio 7, I didn't have broadcast records. Those had occurred during his tenure or after his departure, when no one was monitoring 166.300, but I checked for corresponding reroute orders, permit modifications, or schedule changes moving civilian or staff activity away from those coordinates around those dates. I found 5 instances in the past 11 months where activities near Tenorio's assigned sites had been quietly rerouted within 72 hours of his scheduled visit date. Same pattern, same RPD authorization, same non-existent VOS. The broadcasts had been happening this whole time, whether anyone was listening or not, whether anyone was logging them under 7-X or not. The system didn't need me. It didn't need a technician monitoring the frequency. It ran on its own assignments, broadcasts, reroutes, a 3-step cycle operating continuously in the background of normal district operations. I was just the first person in a while who noticed. Saturday, I forced myself not to investigate. I cleaned my apartment, did laundry, went for a run on the road past the district compound, cooked dinner, tried to sleep, couldn't. At 1:30 Sunday morning, I was back in the shop, sitting at my bench in the dark, with the scan receiver running and my notebook open. The receiver locked at 0208, 166.300. I was ready this time, watching the display when the carrier appeared. The broadcast described a solo technician at the Burnt Ridge repeater site. Male, early 30s, apparent disorientation, not responding to radio contact. Coordinates matched the Burnt Ridge site exactly, requesting ground team for welfare check. Time of incident? 1100, 14 days from now. The exact date and time of Tenorio's active assignment. I wrote it all down. Every word, every coordinate, every timestamp. Then I sat back and looked at what I had. The Burnt Ridge assignment was created 4 days ago. The logbook entry, if the pattern held, was already written, physically, in the Burnt Ridge site cabinet. I hadn't verified that yet, but the pattern hadn't broken once. And now the broadcast had arrived, right on schedule, describing an emergency involving the person assigned to be at that location on that date. But here's what stopped me. The broadcast described a real emergency, a male technician, disoriented, unresponsive. It matched Tenorio's profile. It referenced the assignment. It described the consequences of that assignment being fulfilled. And according to the pattern, within hours, a reroute would appear, moving Tenorio away from Burnt Ridge. Except Tenorio doesn't work here anymore. There's no one to reroute. There's no person to redirect. The system had generated an assignment for a technician who doesn't exist in any active payroll, described his emergency on a frequency that shouldn't carry signal, and would now presumably attempt to prevent that emergency by modifying plans that no living employee is aware of. The cycle was running on its own, processing someone who'd already left, still scheduling him, still broadcasting his emergencies, still protecting him from coordinates he'd never reach, unless the system knew something about Tenorio's status that the personnel records didn't reflect. I checked one more thing. The scheduling system timestamps every entry with a creation date. Tenorio's Burnt Ridge assignment was created Monday 4 days ago. The broadcast I just received arrived Sunday at 02:08. I pulled the scheduling record up again and looked at the exact creation timestamp, Monday, 0917. The broadcast had arrived a full 30 hours before the assignment officially existed in the system. The signal described an emergency connected to a visit that hadn't been scheduled yet. The broadcast came first, before the logbook entry, before the schedule assignment, before the reroute. I'd had the sequence wrong, completely wrong. The broadcast wasn't step 3, it was step 1. Everything else, the logbook entries, the assignments, the reroutes, followed from it. The signal wasn't describing emergencies that the scheduling system would later create conditions for. The signal was arriving first, and the system was building the conditions to match it afterward. Something was broadcasting the emergency, and then the entire administrative apparatus was constructing the scenario that would make the broadcast true, unless the reroute prevented it. The broadcast was the cause. Everything I'd assumed was the mechanism was actually the response. And that meant that the broadcast I'd received tonight, the one describing Tenorio, disoriented, unresponsive, at Burnt Ridge in 14 days, wasn't a prediction based on an existing assignment. It was an instruction, and now the system would build the assignment to match, except the assignment already existed. It was already in the system before the broadcast arrived. Both things couldn't be true. The broadcast couldn't come first, and the assignment couldn't already be there, unless there was another broadcast, an earlier one before my monitoring began, that had initiated the cycle, one I hadn't caught, one that started the Burnt Ridge sequence before I started paying attention. I was seeing the middle of something, not the beginning, maybe not even close to the beginning. And the next broadcast, the one that would eventually describe my own emergency at my own assigned site on my own scheduled date, might have already been transmitted days or weeks ago, before I started listening, before I had any reason to. The cycle might already be ahead of me. I started searching backward. If the cycle was ahead of me, I needed to know how far ahead, which meant finding earlier broadcasts I'd missed or earlier assignments I hadn't noticed being created. Sunday morning, 0400, still at my bench. I exported the full scheduling history again, this time going back 3 years. All sites, all technicians. The file was large. I filtered by the 4 RPD access sites first, then expanded to include any site that had ever appeared in a broadcast I'd logged. The results showed something I'd missed in my earlier, narrower search. The anomalous open assignment pattern didn't start with Tenori. Before him, there was a technician named Harwell, GS7, 2-year appointment, departed 18 months before Tenorio arrived. Her assignments appeared in the system the same way, aided without her initiation. Never completed, never closed out. 11 entries across her final 6 months, all at RPD access sites. Before Harwell, another name, Pacheco, 3-year tenure. Same pattern in his final 9 open assignments, never completed, never closed. Before Pacheco, a name I couldn't read clearly in the archived export. The formatting was corrupted in records older than 2015, but the pattern was visible. Open assignments, RPD sites, final months of tenure. I counted backward. The system had records going to 2008. In that span, 5 technicians had held my position. Every single one developed the same scheduling anomaly in their final months before departure. Assignments they didn't create, at sites they didn't request, on dates that accumulated without completion. 5 technicians, 5 identical patterns, and then departure listed variously as transfer, resignation, or end of appointment. None with forwarding contact information in the system. None with a clean final work order closing out their tenure. I was the 6th. The assignments in my name had started appearing 4 days ago, and if the pattern held to the average of my predecessors, I had somewhere between 4 and 6 months before whatever departure meant in this context. But the averages weren't comforting. Tenorio's anomalous assignments appeared for only 3 months before he left. Harwell's ran for 6. Pacheco's for 4. There was no guaranteed timeline, just the fact that once the assignment started appearing, they didn't stop until the technician was gone. Monday morning, I went through the motion. Gabe came in. We reviewed the week's schedule on the whiteboard. Normal maintenance, normal tasks. He didn't notice anything wrong with me. Or if he did, he attributed it to fatigue. I'd slept maybe 4 hours total since Thursday. My hands were steady, but my focus wasn't. I caught myself rereading the same calibration value 3 times during a bench test without retaining it. At 09:30, I opened the scheduling system on my workstation, checked my assignments for the next 30 days, a new entry, created overnight timestamp 02:47, the exact time of the original broadcast 2 weeks ago. Whether that was coincidence or signature, I didn't know. The assignment was for a site called Deer Creek Saddle, a backcountry repeater I'd visited once, 5 months ago. Routine maintenance scheduled for 11 days from now, assigned to me. I had not requested it, I had not been notified. It simply appeared like the others, fully formed and legitimate looking within the system. I checked the Deer Creek Saddle site's access records. RPD liaison listed. Same March 2003 authorization date. I didn't delete the entry. I'd learned that didn't work. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote down the date, the site, and the creation timestamp. Then I waited. If the pattern held, the broadcast would come next, describing an emergency at Deer Creek Saddle, approximately 48 hours before the scheduled assignment date. But I also did something I hadn't done before. I went back through the recording device's audio files. Every capture since I'd started leaving it connected to the scan receiver. I'd been focused on the broadcasts I'd personally witnessed, but the recorder ran continuously. It captured everything the scan receiver locked onto, whether I was present or not. I found 3 additional captures I hadn't reviewed. Short transmissions, 2 cycles each, then silence. They'd occurred during my work hours when I was in the field. I'd been checking the recorder's buffer each morning for overnight captures, but I hadn't been rewinding through the full 24-hour cycle. These had come in during daytime. Mid-morning, early afternoon, times when I was on a tower or in a truck, away from the bench. I played them back. Standard broadcast structure, emergency descriptions, coordinates. The first 2 matched patterns I'd already documented, locations where civilian activities had been subsequently rerouted, but the third stopped me. Coordinates Deer Creek Saddle. Described emergency solo technician female. Equipment-related injury during antenna maintenance not responding to radio contact female solo. Equipment injury. Antenna maintenance. The broadcast was describing me, my work, my gender, my presence at that site on the assigned date. I checked the recording timestamp. The capture was 5 days old, 5 days. The broadcast describing my emergency at Deer Creek Saddle had arrived 5 days before the assignment was created in the scheduling system. The signal came first, just as I'd determined with Tenorio's Burnt Ridge cycle. Broadcast, then assignment, then logbook entry, then reroute. The cycle had been running ahead of me by 5 days. While I was investigating the pattern had already processed me. My emergency was already described. My assignment was already being built. The only remaining step was the reroute, someone moving me away from those coordinates before the described event could occur. I sat at my bench and listened to the recording 3 more times. The voice was the same as every other broadcast female, flat, professional. The coordinates were precise. The described emergency was specific. Antenna maintenance at height. A fall unresponsive requesting extraction. The time of incident listed in the broadcast was 10:30 on the scheduled date. 10:30. I always start tower work in the morning. If I went to Deer Creek Saddle on the assigned date and began the antenna maintenance the assignment specified, I would be on the tower at approximately that time. The broadcast didn't just describe my presence. It described my workflow, my habits, my operational pattern. I spent the rest of Monday in a state I can only describe as suspended professional function. I did my work. I completed a bench calibration. I filed a parts order. I ate lunch. But underneath every action was the awareness that a system I didn't understand had already processed. My future had already transmitted my emergency to no one on a dead frequency, days before the assignment that would put me at risk even existed. The reroute should come next. That was the pattern. The broadcast arrives, the assignment is created, and then someone, VOS, RP, LD, whatever that means, moves the scheduled person away from the coordinates. Every civilian activity had been rerouted. Every previous broadcast had been answered with administrative prevention. But as I reviewed my records, I realized something. The reroutes only applied to civilian activities, hikers, survey teams, permitted groups, external people who could be redirected without explanation. Tenorio's assignments were never rerouted. His open entry sat in the system, unmodified, uncanceled, until he was gone. No one moved him away from the coordinates. No RPD intervention redirected his schedule. The broadcast describing his emergencies went unanswered by the prevention system, and neither had mine. The Deer Creek Saddle assignment was 5 days old now. No reroute, no modification, no cancellation, no D. Boss signature moving me somewhere safe. The system protects civilians. It does not protect technicians. Tuesday evening, 23:40. I was home, not sleeping, reviewing my notes at the kitchen table. The scan receiver was running at the shop I'd started, leaving it recording around the clock. I wouldn't know what it captured until morning, but I didn't need the shop receiver, because at 23:47, my handheld scanner, the personal unit I keep on my nightstand for monitoring weather channels during storm season, locked onto a signal, 166.300 megahertz. In my apartment, I'd never received the broadcast outside the shop. The shop has an external antenna, elevation, clear line of sight to the repeater network. My apartment is a ground floor unit with no external antenna. The handheld's reception on VHF high should be marginal at best from indoors. The signal was strong, the same local quality strength I'd measured at the shop, as if the source were close. I sat on the edge of my bed and listened. Standard structure, coordinates, emergency description, but shorter this time. 2 sentences where there should have been 4. No extraction request. No description of the emergency type. Just coordinates Deer Creek Saddle in a single line. 1 party, present and aware. No extraction required. Then silence. 1 cycle. No repeat. Carrier dropped. Present and aware. That was new language. Every previous broadcast had described someone injured, disoriented, unresponsive, someone in need of rescue. This one describes someone who is simply there, conscious, knowing, no extraction required, because the described person wasn't going to need rescuing, because the described person was going to be there willingly, because the described person already knew what waited at those coordinates. I looked at my calendar on the nightstand. 11 days until the Deer Creek Saddle assignment, an assignment I never created, describing work I never planned, at a site the system already expects me to reach, and now a broadcast confirming, not warning, that I would arrive, not as a victim, as a participant. The system wasn't trying to prevent my presence at Deer Creek Saddle. It was confirming it. I tried to refuse the assignment. Wednesday morning, I went into the scheduling system and marked the Deer Creek Saddle visit as declined, scheduling conflict. The system accepted it, status changed, entry grayed out. By Thursday afternoon, it was back, active, green, assigned to me. Same date, same site, no record of my declination in the edit history. I tried a different approach. I created a conflicting assignment for myself on the same date, a repeater inspection at Lookout Flat on the opposite side of the district. If both existed simultaneously, the scheduling system should flag a conflict. It didn't. Both entries coexisted without error, as if the system didn't recognize them as competing demands on the same person. Friday, I went to Paul, not about the broadcasts, about the scheduling issue specifically. Kept it administrative. I've got a conflict on the 14th, I said. Deer Creek Saddle and Lookout Flat are both on my calendar. I didn't create the Deer Creek entry. Can you check who did? Paul looked at his screen for about 10 seconds. That's an automated entry, he said, generated by the preventive maintenance module. Every site gets a rotation. Deer Creek Saddle isn't on the standard rotation. It's annual, and I was there 5 months ago. He looked at the screen again, longer this time. I'll look into it. In the meantime, prioritize Deer Creek. Lookout Flat can wait. He said it without emphasis. The way you say something you've decided in advance, but want to sound like you're deciding now. I went back to my shop. 8 days until the assignment date. Over the weekend, the broadcast continued. 2 more captures on the recorder, both describing emergencies at other sites, both matching the now familiar structure. I logged them under 7-X, because at this point the official record was the only thing I could still control. I wanted the timestamps to exist somewhere besides my notebook. Monday, 7 days out. I checked the Deer Creek Saddle assignment again. Still active. But now something had been added, a work order attachment I hadn't seen before. Specific task, antenna feed inspection, impedance verification, firmware status check, detailed enough to constitute a procedure. The work order had a creation timestamp of 0300 Sunday, middle of the night. No one in the office. The tasks described in the work order were exactly the type of work that would put me on the tower, at height, alone, working with antenna connections. The scenario the broadcast had described. I could feel the structure tightening. Each piece that appeared in the system moved me closer to the exact conditions the broadcast had specified, not through force, through paperwork, through legitimate-looking procedure that no single person seemed to control, but that consistently produced the same outcome. Me, at Deer Creek Saddle, on the tower, on the 14th. By Wednesday, I stopped sleeping in any real sense. 2 or 3 hours broken into segments. I'd wake up and check my phone, checking what? I wasn't sure. Expecting another assignment, another work order, another detail being added to the 14th. Thursday, 4 days out, I made a decision, not a brave one, a pragmatic one. I was going to go to Deer Creek Saddle, not on the 14th, early, 3 days early, on my own terms, on my own schedule, without the system's timestamp attached to my presence. If something was expecting me on a specific date, I'd arrive when it wasn't ready. I drove out Friday morning, 2-hour drive on progressively worse roads. The last 6 miles were single-lane gravel with turnouts. Climbing through Douglas fir and western red cedar, I reached the gate at 08:15, unlocked it, signed the gate log. drove through, relocked behind me. The site looked normal. Small clearing at 4,800 feet. Equipment cabinet, antenna tower, solar array. Everything in its expected position. No unusual tracks on the access road. No sign of recent visitation beyond normal wildlife activity. I opened the cabinet, ran diagnostics. Everything nominal. Battery, solar controller, repeater function all green. I checked the antenna feed with my multimeter. Impedance within spec. No issues. Then I opened the site logbook. The last entry was mine, from 5 months ago. Routine inspection, normal. Below it, nothing. No future dated entry, no unfamiliar handwriting, just blank pages. I stood there for a moment, processing the absence. Every other RPD access site had shown the pattern. Future dated entries in blue ink, precise handwriting, maintenance actions not yet performed. This site had nothing. I almost felt relief. Then I turned back one page. My previous entry from 5 months ago read, quarterly inspection, all systems nominal, battery at 94%, antenna alignment verified, Ellison-C. That was correct. I remembered writing it, but below my entry on the same page, in the same blue ink and precise handwriting I'd seen at every other site, was a completion record for the work order that had appeared in the system Monday. The firmware check, the impedance verification, every task listed in the attachment documented as performed, normal maintenance shorthand, clear professional notation completed by Ellison-C, date the 14th, my name, my initial, documenting work I hadn't done, on a date I hadn't reached, in handwriting that wasn't mine. Someone had written a completion record for my future visit, not just scheduled it, closed it out, as if it had already happened, as if I had already been here, already done the work, already climbed the tower and checked the antenna and come back down. The entry existed in the physical logbook as a finished task, waiting for the date to catch up to it. I photographed. My hands were not steady this time. I'm noting that because it's relevant, this was the first moment in 3 weeks where my body reacted before my training. I walked to the base of the antenna tower, looked up. 80 feet of galvanized steel lattice, standard Forest Service to climbing pad, safety cable, the antenna array at the top, exactly did 5 months ago. Nothing wrong, but the work order specified inspection, which meant climbing on the tower, which was what had described. I'm gonna climb, not today. The antenna feed was fine. I'd verified it from the cabinet side with my multimeter. There was no technical reason to go up, but I understood now why the system specified it. The work order wasn't about maintenance. It was about position. It needed me at the top of that tower, at that time, for a reason the broadcast couldn't convey in its flat, professional structure. I was standing at the base of the tower looking up when my handheld scanner broke squelch. I'd left it on, clipped to my vest, scanning, force of habit. The signal came through the small speaker clearly. Same frequency, same characteristics. 166.300, a broadcast, live, while I was standing at the site. One cycle, short, different from any I'd heard before. Update to previous broadcast, Deer Creek Saddle, one party present and aware, status, early arrival, no extraction required. Revised timeline, immediate. Then silence. Carrier dropped. I looked at my watch. 0847, the exact time the original broadcast had listed for the incident. The broadcast I'd first heard 5 days ago, describing a technician at this site at this time. The date was wrong, I was here, 3 days early, but the time was exact. 0847. The broadcast had just revised itself, in real time, while I was standing at the coordinates. It wasn't locked to the 14th, it was locked to me. The date had been an estimate. My presence was the trigger. I put my hand on the scanner and turned it off. Physically pressed the power button until the display went dark. Stood in the clearing with the tower above me and the cabinet behind me and the forest on every side. Silent, and felt for the first time that I was not investigating something. I was standing inside it. The logbook had my name. The work order had my tasks. The broadcast had my description. The scheduling system had my date. And now the signal had acknowledged my early arrival and adjusted. Every piece of the system was oriented around my physical presence at this point in space, and it didn't care what date I chose to arrive. It only cared that I came, and I had come, voluntarily, 3 days early, trying to be ahead of the pattern, and the pattern had simply noted my arrival and continued. I walked back to my truck, got in, started the engine, sat with it idling for 2 minutes, looking at the site in my mirrors. Normal clearing, normal equipment, normal tower. Before I pulled away, I opened the scheduling system on my laptop one more time. Checked the Deer Creek Saddle assignment status completed. Closed out 4 minutes ago while I was standing in the clearing. Completion noted with my name, my credentials, and a timestamp of 0851, 4 minutes after the revised broadcast. I had not completed the work. I had not performed the tasks. I had not climbed the tower, but the system had closed the assignment as fulfilled. My presence alone had satisfied whatever condition it required. Being there, at those coordinates, aware and conscious of what was happening, was the work. I drove back down the mountain with the scanner off and the radio off and the windows up. 2 hours of silence. When I reached the district compound, I parked in front of my shop and sat in the truck for a long time. The assignment was complete. The cycle had processed me, and I still didn't know what it had accomplished by doing so, but I knew one thing: the completion record in the logbook, the one in handwriting that wasn't mine, dated the 14th, was still there, still bearing my name, still documenting a visit on a date 3 days from now, a visit the system now considered already finished. Either the logbook entry was wrong and would remain a ghost record of something that didn't happen on that date, or the system expected me back on the 14th to do it again, to make the written record true in a way that today's visit hadn't fully satisfied. The assignment was closed, but the logbook still waited for the 14th, and I couldn't determine which document was telling the truth. I didn't go back on the 14th. I made that decision Sunday night, sitting at my kitchen table with my notebook open and every piece of evidence laid out in chronological order. The logbook said the 14th. The system said complete. Both couldn't be true, but I wasn't going to resolve the contradiction by putting myself at those coordinates again. Whatever the cycle needed from my presence, it had gotten it once. I wasn't offering twice. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, normal days. I did my work, calibrated equipment, filed reports. Gabe and I replaced a damaged solar panel at the Ridge 6 site. I ate lunch at my bench. I slept better than I had in 2 weeks. Not well, but functionally. The scan receiver ran continuously in the shop. 166.300 remained silent. The 14th was a Thursday. I spent it at the district office, 40 miles from Deer Creek Saddle, processing parts orders and updating inventory logs. Deliberate, verifiable. I time-stamped my work. I made sure Janet saw me at the front desk at 0900 and again at 1400. I wanted a record of where I was. Nothing happened. No broadcast. No scheduling anomaly. No revised assignment. The day passed like any other. By Friday morning, I'd started to feel something that might have been relief, except it was too thin and too conditional to trust. Friday afternoon, I checked the Deer Creek Saddle logbook entry remotely. We keep digital photos of each site's logbook pages in a shared maintenance archive. I'd photographed the future-dated completion record during my early visit. I opened the image now. It was still there. My name, the 14th, tasks listed as completed. The handwriting that wasn't mine. But something had changed. Below the entry in the same blue ink, same precise lettering, a new line had appeared. It hadn't been there when I photographed the page 8 days ago. I was certain, because I'd photographed the entire visible page, including the blank space beneath. The new line read, verified, Ellison C. One word and my name, as if I'd returned on the 14th and signed off on the work, as if my presence at the site that day had been confirmed. But I wasn't there. I was at the district office. Janet saw me. My truck's GPS log would confirm my location. I did not go to Deer Creek Saddle on the 14th. The entry was false, or the entry was documenting something that didn't require my physical body to be present. something that my awareness of the date and the site and the cycle was sufficient to fulfill. I closed the archive. I didn't photograph it again. I didn't tell anyone. There was nothing to tell that wouldn't sound like a breakdown, and I wasn't breaking down. I was functional. I was doing my job. I was simply aware that a parallel record of my professional life existed in logbooks and scheduling systems, documenting actions I hadn't performed on dates I'd deliberately avoided, and that this parallel record was self-maintaining and indifferent to my cooperation. The following week, I did something I'd been avoiding. I pulled the departure records for all 5 previous technicians who'd held my position. Not the personnel files, those were beyond my access, but the scheduling system's historical data. Specifically, I looked at what happened to their anomalous open assignments after they left. Everyone was marked complete, closed out, dated on or near the originally scheduled date. Completion timestamps fell within hours of the assigned time. Work descriptions noted as performed, signed with the departed technician's name and initials. All of them. Every open assignment for every departed technician had been fulfilled according to the system after they were no longer employed here, after they'd resigned or transferred or whatever word applied to their departure. The assignments kept completing themselves. The records kept filling in. Whatever participation the cycle required, it didn't end when you left. I thought about Marsh, not anyone I'd contacted, but the name Tenorio had written in the margin of one of his logbook entries. A single notation, Marsh still active in system. I'd assumed at the time it meant someone's assignment was still appearing. Now I understood differently. Still active meant still being documented, still being placed at coordinates, still having work signed in their name, possibly years after walking away. 3 weeks passed. November arrived. Rain, low clouds, the district going quiet for the season. Gabe took a week of leave. Paul sent an email about budget projections for the next fiscal year. Normal operations. I settled into a routine that included the broadcasts. They came 2 or 3 times a week. Now I logged them under 7-X, noted the coordinates in my private record, and watched the corresponding reroutes appear in the permit system within hours. The civilian protection side of the cycle was functioning normally. Hikers moved, survey teams redirected, Voss's signature appearing on paperwork from a division that didn't exist, quietly preventing emergencies that hadn't happened yet. I stopped trying to understand it, not out of acceptance, out of practical recognition that understanding wasn't available to me, and pursuing it changed nothing about the system's operation. It ran whether I comprehended it or not. My job was maintenance. I maintained, but I watched, and I noticed things. I noticed that the reroute orders started appearing faster within minutes of my logging the broadcast rather than hours, as if the system was becoming more efficient, or as if my participation was reducing some kind of friction in the process. I noticed that new assignments continued to appear in my schedule, sites I hadn't visited, dates spreading out over the coming months, each one at an RPD access location, each one eventually associated with a broadcast and a logbook entry I hadn't written. I noticed that the assignments I declined or avoided were completed anyway. The records filled themselves in. My name appeared in documentation whether I was present or not, and I noticed in late November that a new name appeared in the scheduling system. A new technician assigned to the district. Start date? January. Position RF Communications Technician GS7, entry-level 1st District posting. No one had told me we were getting a second tech. No one had told me my position was being supplemented. The requisition didn't appear in any hiring document I had access to, but the name was in the system. And already 2 months before their start date, 3 maintenance assignments existed under their name. RPD-access sites. Dates in February and March. The familiar pattern. The opening moves of a cycle that would look to a new technician routine scheduling. I could contact them. I could warn them. I could explain what I document, show them the evidence, tell them about the frequency and the logbooks and the assignments needed themselves. But I remembered Paul's minute response, the rehearsed instruction. And I realized with a clarity that felt less like understanding and more like gravity, that I was now the person who already knew, the person who'd respond in 4 minutes with a specific code, the person who'd say atmospheric ducting and log it under 7-X and mean something entirely different underneath. Not because anyone had instructed me to become that, because the cycle had placed me here long enough that I was now the institutional memory, the silence, the compliance that looked like authority. The last broadcast I received was on a Tuesday night in early December. 313. Standard structure, standard frequency. But the content was different, not in format, but in what it described. This is an emergency broadcast for all available units. Deer Creek Saddle Site, one party status, present and aware. No emergency, no extraction, signal maintenance complete. End of active monitoring period. 1 cycle, no repeat. Carrier dropped. I sat at my bench in the dark and read my own notes by the light of the receiver's display. 3 months of documentation. Timestamps, coordinates, frequencies, patterns. Evidence of something operating in the background of a federal land management district, using scheduling software and maintenance procedures and radio infrastructure to place people at specific coordinates on specific dates for reasons that never clarified themselves. The broadcast had said end of active monitoring period, not end of the cycle, not end of the broadcasts, end of my monitoring period, as if my attention had been the variable and it had reached its necessary duration. I'm still here. I still maintain the district's communications infrastructure. The assignments still appear in my schedule and complete themselves whether I attend or not. The broadcasts still arrive on 166.300, and I still log them under 7-X. The new technician starts in 5 weeks. Their schedule is already being built. I have not told Paul that I know. I have not told anyone. Not because I was ordered not to. The original directive was specific to the first night, and I've long since exceeded its scope. I don't tell anyone because there's nothing actionable to tell. The system prevents emergencies. Civilians are rerouted away from harm. The broadcasts serve a protective function. That much I can verify from 12 weeks of data. People are being kept safe by a mechanism that operates through dead frequencies, impossible documentation, and administrative ghost signature. What I can't verify is what it needs from the technician, why we're placed at those coordinates, what our presence complete, why the records document actions we didn't take, attendance we didn't provide, why the cycle keeps running in our names longer we by lead. I maintain the equipment carries the signal describes the emergencies get prevented. And somewhere in that loop, my presence at specific coordinates on specific dates accomplishes something I cannot measure or name. The new technician's name is in the system. 3 assignments already waiting. The first is at Miller Creek, February 8th. There's probably a logbook entry waiting for them there already, in blue ink, in handwriting they won't recognize, dated before their first day of work. I could drive out there now, check the book, confirm or deny. I won't, because confirming changes nothing, and because the last time I went looking for evidence ahead of schedule, the system simply adjusted its timeline to meet me. I log the broadcasts, I file the code, I maintain the repeaters that carry a signal no hardware in my district should be able to produce. And in 5 weeks, when a 24-year-old technician arrives for their first rotation and asks me about the legacy frequencies still in the monitoring scan, I will know exactly what to say. I'll say it's atmospheric ducting, legacy analog signals, log it under 7-X, don't worry about it. And I'll mean every word. Because worrying about it is not what the system requires. It only requires that you hear it.